Welcome to the Liberty Alert with Gregory Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C., a program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking two-kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C., and friends of the program all around the country. I'm Gregory Seltz. Welcome to the Liberty Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to people of faith. Today, we again are privileged to have with us Tim Goeglein, the VP of Government Affairs for Focus on the Family, and also great friend of the LCRL. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much, and Happy New Year.
Well, Happy New Year again to you, and it's great to be with you. Are you surviving the January onslaught of winter?
The answer is I am. I'm the Midwesterner, so, four
this is
seasons
nothing.
Four seasons are in my DNA. I must tell you, I really do love all four seasons of the year, and I love winter. I like snow, I like ice, I like wind. Yes, I'm a walker, so I'm out every day, 3 miles, rain or snow. But I'm in my heart of hearts, I'm a summer man, so we can buzz along this bitterly cold weather as soon as God so chooses.
Well, my wife loves all four seasons too, and she is a Texan, so she keeps wanting to move north, and I always say I'm the guy that wants to keep moving south. As a Detroit.
She wants to get closer to Lake Michigan, and you want to get closer to the Rio Grande.
That's exactly right. You are absolutely right. All right. Well, today we want to talk again about the March for Life, an incredible day that we just had on Friday last week. But before we jump into the March for Life and what an incredible event that is every year, the Coach Kennedy case that came up, and were you surprised by that, or were you did you think that was going to happen?
I'm an inveterate optimist, and I remember one of the programs that we did very early in 2021, where we spoke with a member of First Liberty Institute, the legal firm for Coach Kennedy,
right?
And I remember expressing optimism that this was such a patent violation of his religious liberty and constitutional rights that I felt he was almost destined to have this taken by the court. And Greg, it's worth saying, thousands and thousands of cases are petitioned to the court, and every single term, the Supreme Court, I think, takes less than 60 cases. Right. So you have to be an optimist for that. But I did really believe then and now that this is a very important case. The Coach Kennedy case is very interesting, isn't it? Because he was not praying, as a Washington State coach before the game, with his players or at halftime. He was praying afterward, and there was no compulsion, there was no mandate. Other governments seem to like mandates. He wasn't mandating anything. This was free will, right. And some of his players have certainly wanted to join. And I think that's a great tradition in America. And I think he deserves to win this case.
Yeah. And I think one of the things and we're going to talk about it today when we talk about taking back the narrative, I'm getting to the point where I say to Christian, again, I understand the people who don't like the Christian worldview, but those of us who are Christian, you need to understand we're being categorized. There's a narrative that we're somehow seditious. So praying at the 50-yard line in private after everyone is gone, we can't have that because that's seditious. And I'm saying, no. The Christian worldview is fundamental to the liberties you have. And this notion that it's seditious we've got to stamp that out. We've got to take that back because that is, first of all, it's not right. It's actually a lie, but it's to demonize a beautiful, beautiful way of life. And so here's a guy just living his life, and he's being categorized as seditious. And I think that's the one thing Christians need to understand this, because it's hard to preach the gospel if the culture says you're seditious.
The wonderful thing about the United States is that we have limitless numbers of examples of great coaches at public schools, at private schools, We have generals, captains, commanders, admirals, presidents. We have the wonderful example, of a proverbial, city council meeting or a village council meeting, where one of the local rabbis or priests or pastors is invited to invoke, Providence's wisdom, in leading and guiding. This is a very great tradition in America, and one that was completely and totally commodious to our founding.
Right.
And so that we have somehow arrived, in the 21st century in a state named for George Washington, and brought down the hammer against a high school coach who wants to pray after a game seems awfully far afield.
Well, last thing on this, when I was at this meeting on the Hill, and it was talking about immigration, and one of the questions came up, and I always use this as an example when I'm speaking to people. One of the questions came up: we're so divided on this. How are we going to ever get back to being a unified country? And that was, of course, posed to us as panel members. And before I could jump in, the rabbi jumped in. And here's what he said. He said, well, if we could all start treating each other and looking at each other as created in the image of God, that would be a start. And so when he said that, I said, how do you think the room reacted? And everyone that I talked to says, oh, they probably got mad. They were upset. No, standing ovation, all sides of the aisle. And then after he was done, I raised my hand and said, well, but you can't say that in most university places. You cannot say that in public schools. And you can't say what he just said. I said, that is the issue. So again, like you said, this is crazy because the worldview that gave us this kind of tolerance is now the one view that we just don't seem to tolerate. Anyway, we'll talk more about.
And may I say, Greg, just very briefly, concurrent to what you've asked, I was just at the Supreme Court yesterday here in Washington. For the Boston flag case. This is a remarkable case of a case called Camp Constitution. That is the Judaic-Christian tradition. They wanted, to raise their flag over Boston City Hall. And there's a tradition at Boston City Hall, that every group you can possibly imagine uses for 1 hour the ability to raise their symbolic flag over the city of Boston. Communists have done it, Buddhists have done it, the countries, causes, etc. But with Little Camp Constitution, wanted to raise its flag, which was, otherwise known as the Christian flag. They were denied the right to do that. And I feel confident that the Supreme Court will affirm that their constitutional rights were violated and that Boston made a mistake.
Even the ACLU is on our side on this one.
Exactly. You know.
But you're talking about the fact that it's, we're seeing this in the mandates. They're given all kinds of accommodations. It's only the religious, and it's generally the Christians that are told, no, you're not going to get it. And this has gotten to the point of ridiculousness. And I think church people need to understand that's not something to be dialogued with. That's something to be stamped out so that we can be God's people in the public square. All right. So one of the great events, like I said, that we participate in every year here on the Hill is the March for Life. And that is it's the largest civil rights gathering in the world, protest in the world. And it's not only a protest, it's peaceful, it's joyful. There's people from all walks of life, all ethnicities, everywhere. Just start off with what makes this March thing so special from your point of view?
Well, I think the thing that makes the March for Life so special, Greg, is that it gets larger and younger every year.
Yes.
It's really a dramatic thing to watch. If you had time-lapse photography and you started, the camera at sunrise, it's amazing to go, around the Supreme Court Plaza, down near the U.S. Senate and House, down Constitution Avenue here in Washington, and to watch buses and busloads of elementary school, middle school, high school students from all around the United States. They pour out of Union Station, some of them coming by trains. Mm-hmm. Some of them fly in that morning and stay a few days and fly back. Now, it would be different, no doubt, with COVID and with the mask and CDC card mandates in Washington this year. And I do, believe very strongly that the march, is always special. But, the kind of prohibitive factors of COVID are always factors. But the thing that I take heart in is that, as with this year, it's amazing demographically how young the people are, the Americans are, who come to celebrate human life.
Yeah, my niece is actually coming in. She's a high school student, and they're participating for the first year. And so, we're going to welcome them. That's going to be exciting. And she's not coming with the Lutheran groups. There's a lot of Lutheran groups, young groups coming in. She's going to Catholic school, actually. And so her dad and she are coming with a whole group of kids like that. And they're very excited about this, because what a powerful I think what's special about this is the message too. Like you said, not only the demographics at the Dobbs protest, or the Dobbs prayer gathering in front of the Capitol, or in front of the Supreme Court, I was surprised to see like Atheists for Life. I was surprised to see all these ideological groups that were pro-life. I'm not sure exactly what their argument for the pro-life cause was, but to get to the point where they even see human life as precious. What an incredible message that's starting to pull lots of people together.
Well, may I say to that point, the pro-abortion segment of our country is really without any excuse. There really is no theological argument in defense of taking the life of a precious unborn child.
Right.
There's no philosophical reason to take a life. There's no political reason. There's no scientific or medical reason to take a child's life. It must be something else. And that's what the pro-life movement has been saying since the very beginning. I was very humbled and honored to know the founder of the March for Life. She was a very good friend, Nellie Gray. I worked very closely with her for 8 years of my life. She was an extraordinary woman. And she made sure that the March for Life took place every single year, and that it would take place in perpetuity until Providence cleared its throat and the Supreme Court recognized that there's no constitutional protection for the destruction of more than 65 million Americans. Yeah. And God willing, to your point, in late June or before, the Supreme Court will officially, God willing, gut and overturn Roe against Wade and the Casey decision of the early 1990s. And then, Greg, we have the really tough work ahead.
Right.
The largest question, I might say, is, are we ready for a post-Roe America? I think that's a very important historical question. I'm not sure that we are.
I think, just like in any other big battle, when it takes 50 years to actually get, the first battle won, you forget that the war is still about the hearts and minds of people, and the positive message of them being precious, and how we got to keep fighting for that. And like you said, that's going to be a narrative discussion, a dialogical discussion. And that's going to go back to the states where it gets real, where people actually can participate, and they actually are going to see the vitriol that's involved in this kind of stuff. And it's not, but again, the whole point is, do it for the sake of not only the country, but do it for the sake of your neighbor, because this message even blesses them, even if they disagree with us.
I remember a number of years ago reading a then famous book and a wildly popular bestseller called The Brethren by Bob Woodward. Right. And it was a very early look at how Roe was actually decided. I'm very sorry to say it's a bit of a creepy book because you have people like former Justice Harry Blackmun kind of going away for the summer and trying to educate himself on these rather sophisticated arguments of science and technology and health. And you realize very quickly that this is exactly the opposite of what the drafters of the Constitution ever envisioned for the United States Supreme Court, much less someone like Harry Blackmun, who knew zero about any of this. Right. And what the Brethren evokes, Greg, is that at the end of the day, it was essentially a political decision. It's bad policy. But it was a political decision, and the inner workings of the politics that is evoked in the Brethren is a rather sobering thing to read. memos flying around, letters flying around, how they're going to game out this issue or that aspect. And as I say, we wake up, it's 2022, and we have 60 plus million innocent preborn children who have lost their lives over the utterly unethical way in which this whole decision was decided.
Yeah, and again, that's another discussion we could have, is to talk about how, guys like Woodrow Wilson, they wanted the Supreme Court to literally rule the country, actually, as long as it was in line with his politics. And by the way, he was a bigot. And so, the packing the court stuff all started back with him. And the whole point was, we can't leave it up to the electorate to actually determine how they want to live with each other and for each other. We have to have the smart people do this for us. And he wanted to do that with the Supreme Court. And Roe v. Wade was an argument, was an action kind of in line with that way of thinking. Now, what's so your experience, your personal experience, what is your favorite thing that has happened on the day? Is it the Rose Dinner? Is it participating in the march? Is it being with so many joyful friends on the Hill? What is it?
Well, it is all those things, but my favorite part of the day is the solemnity of the time of prayer. God hears our prayers. I love the King James version, prayer availeth much. I love those three words,
Right.
Greg, it's a day of activism. It's a day of marching. It's a day of remembering. But at the end of the day, it's very, very solemn. Right. You realize that the enormous destruction that has happened as a result of the toxic decision by those 9 unelected lawyers, in 1973, and you realize that there's a terrible price to pay for that kind of injudicious reasoning, and the beauty and the glory of the pro-life movement, which I believe is one of a handful of the most important civil rights movements in all of American history. The beautiful thing is that it's utterly and totally nonviolent. Right. And in fact, in those terrible moments where, in the name, of being opposed to abortion, that terribly irresponsible people have acted evilly and violently to try to fight violence with violence, has always been roundly condemned by the pro-life movement. Yeah. But I think the solemnity of prayer, and knowing that over all these years, God has heard our prayer, and Absolutely. We're certainly praying about Dobbs, and that really is my favorite part about the March for Life.
Yeah, and mine is kind of like towards the end with the Rose Dinner. It's kind of like you said, after all the energy of listening and participating, yes. and hearing proclamations and all the machinations of the years past, come to fruition. Then the Rose Dinner, where there's a solemnity to that too, where we hunker down and we talk about this in terms of what does God want for us to do, and what has He done? What an exciting thing to speak. Mine was to actually speak. When Vice President Pence started off the Rose Dinner, and then I followed up with him, and I just thought what an incredible moment it was to see all the power brokers of our country, but then even just regular folks, we're all in this together, and it was an exciting time. Now, we only got a few more minutes left, but when we talk about this, the March for Life, what I think it really did for us is it gave us a way of looking at these very contentious issues and said, there's narratives going on here, and we got to take back that narrative. Because in 1973, suddenly the pro-life narrative was illegal. I mean, it just was, or it was one of those, what they called us, the anti-abortionists, and they, we were caricatured and again demonized and all those kind of things. And now we're even unconstitutional. And so one by one, year by year, they start taking that narrative back, and they say pro-life is pro-woman, pro-life is pro-science, pro-life is pro-fathers and pro-family, and this year equality from the womb. So equal rights from the womb to the tomb. And so you're starting to see little by little, they just start turning this around, and all in terms of a positive narrative. Talk about that, because I think, we see this happening all the time. The narrative is Christians are negative people. Christians are they're not joy filled. All of that's wrong. All of it's caricatured, but we see it on television. We see it in print. We see it virtually in every aspect of our culture. And, that it's a caricature, but it is an overarching narrative virtually everywhere. And so how do we take that back? How do we continue to take that narrative back?
One of the books that has had the greatest influence on me is a book by the great C.S. Lewis called The Great Divorce. Right. And you may remember that the power of the narrative of that book, Greg, is that C.S. Lewis imaginatively imagines the entire novel inside the gates of hell. In other words, the gates are not locked from the outside; right. They're locked from the inside.
That's right.
Right. And so it's an inversion. It's an inversion of moral equanimity and the ballast that defines the moral good, the common good. And the beautiful thing about the Missouri Synod is that we have been pro-life from the beginning. That was not true about a lot of other non-Catholic Christian Americans. Our friends in the Southern Baptist Convention were favorably disposed toward abortion just after Roe against Wade. A lot of Protestants said that this is just a Catholic issue. Right. Nothing to see here. Move along. So it seems to me that C.S. Lewis understood that you can sell people, the so-called beautiful side of evil, until people get inside those gates and they realize that it's all a great big lie, that it's not ultimately rooted in whether you're left-wing or right-wing, conservative or liberal. The question is never that. The question is the following: what is just? Abraham Lincoln had to reason this. He didn't begin an abolitionist. Let's remember that. But he finally said the thing that broke him on the question of slavery was the combination of two things: that it was immoral and it was unjust. In other words, it was bad policy. So I don't think you have to be a man or woman of faith to say that you're pro-life, although in my view, it's completely consistent with our faith. But I think this question of reason and faith together as to what is just and what is the moral good is always a beautiful way to reason any public policy, foreign or domestic.
Yeah, and I think that's where people need to understand the church has a role to play. That's not our gospel role. That's not preaching the gospel. I understand that, which is our ultimate message. But we have a role to play even in the culture, and that's where we're the moral voice that says, for instance, what do you count? What you may have a narrative, but does that narrative align with the facts? Is it align with the truth? Is it align with what's just? I was just asking this question the other day. I said, what's the most deadly, what have people died of most this last year? And people were like, well, was it COVID? Was it cancer? Was it heart? No, 45, I think it was over 40 million abortions happened worldwide this year. So it depends. Yeah. We're not counting any of that. No, and so here we come as a church and say, well, if we're going to talk about being a humane culture, that number shouldn't be. That just should, that's a number that makes us cringe because it goes to our humanity. Well, we don't even count it. We don't see it in any newspapers. We don't see it people sneering at it in any comedy shows or anything like that. And so again, it's almost like it doesn't exist. Well, our job as a church is to make sure that fundamental things are constantly in the public's eye. And so part of our role is to say, hey, folks, what kind of people are we? And the March for Life, they've done it in a very positive way too. They just don't say, well, here's all the abortions. They say why it's pro-woman. They defend why it's good for women. They defend why it's pro-science. I remember in high school, being taught that in the womb, right after conception, we went through the stages of Darwinian evolution, and then we finally became a child somewhere down the line. Well, that's just false. Is wrong. It's the worst kind of science in our books still today. And so from the time you're conceived, you are a human being. What a beautiful thing. So again, like you said, little by little by little, they took this back. And what a blessing it has been, even for those who are not people of faith.
I remember very vividly, Greg, I went to a very large public university that was overwhelmingly progressive. And when I was a freshman, I was very intrigued. I had been in the student commons and saw, one of those advertisements that was tacked to a board that there was going to be an abortion debate. And I was very eager to go, and I did. And I remember that the very first point that was raised by the moderator is, when does life begin? Sure. And I turned to a friend of mine and I said, life begins when the sperm and the egg come together. Now, that's, I think, one sentence. We're going to spend a whole evening on this. And the question is, we have spent as a nation, tying ourselves, frankly, in a kind of toxic twist over this question of human life. And the greatest pro-life movement in my entire life, Greg, was not at the March for Life. It was watching the National Prayer Breakfast, when Mother Teresa of Calcutta got up I think she was like 5 feet tall. And she said, give all the children to me. She said, anybody, who is contemplating abortion, give them to me. We'll find a home for them. And that spirit of humility and humanity, right, rooted in faith, of course, but ultimately expressed in the public square, with such attractiveness and magnanimity and grace. It was the culture of life. And I think we can remember Mother Teresa, and we can remember Henry Hyde, and we can remember these great champions and heroes of the pro-life movement. I think it's important that when we march, we also remember their courage and their strength.
Well, they led the charge. It was thematic. It was intentional. It was on the offensive, because they knew it wasn't just about narratives. It was about what was true for us all. And, in closing, I'll just say it this way. When I was Whatever Happened to the Human Race by Francis Schaeffer. And one of the things that he talked about over and over again is a human race values life. And so again, what a great thing to have participated in it again this year. It might be the last year for the march, depending on what happens with the Dobbs case in June. But we will always be marching for life, so that other people know how precious their lives are from the God who created us and redeemed us. Tim, thanks for being here with me today, and thanks for participating another year in the March for Life.
A real joy. Be of good cheer. Thank you.
You as well. Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Alert with Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.